actually in the stream yet. Hold on. Hello, all. Ole. We've got one in the stream so far. Sorry it's taking so long. I'm still trying to get set up. Alright, we have 2 viewers. I will, once it loads, begin the first story. Alright, welcome everybody to the stream. The first story we will be reading is a creepypasta called Blood Magic by Tobias Wade. I was almost friends with a monster when I was 11 years old. I would have preferred a human friend, but my family had just moved to a new city. Hold on. I have an ad blocking the... Come on. Okay. I would have preferred a human friend, but my family had just moved to a new city, where everyone was cold and distant. My father promised that I would meet new people at school, but there were still a few weeks of summer, and I had nothing to do. Elisa Williams was the one I really wanted to be friends with. She lived next door in a beautiful gray house, with a high fenced yard. I used to sit with my back to the fence and listen to her playing and giggling. The sound bubbling up like music made for everyone but me. I wasn't brave enough to introduce myself, but after a few days of moping around the house, my mother volunteered to do it for me. I stood behind her, carrying a basket of cookies, while she knocked on the neighbor's door. Elisa, the man who opened it, looked like a poorly shaved bear. Get over here and meet your new friend. We're busy, came the shrill response from somewhere deeper in the house. My mother marveled at the woodworking and craftsmanship and asked the age of the venerable structure. Now, Elisa, the bear bellowed. I know you're alone up there. A short, angry sigh, like what circus lions must do before they're forced onto stage. Then footsteps creaking down the stairs. I've got cookies, I supplied hopefully. Elisa spends all day playing by herself, the bear said. She's been so lonely since her mother passed. Some company will be good for her. I thought about the giggling I heard through the fence, and I didn't understand how someone could have such a good time on their own. Elisa appeared a moment later, her head hanging low in surly obedience. She wore shorts and long socks pulled halfway up her thighs, one bright green and the other purple. That's all I really saw, because I was so embarrassed that I couldn't look up from the basket of cookies I held out. Elisa snatched the whole basket and briskly turned around again. I glimpsed a wave of black hair, curly like her father's, but not so wild. After a few steps, she turned to glare over her shoulder. Light off too? What? I'm confused. Wait. Hey, it's gotta be spooky. Alright, where was I? It does add to the spooky. I glimpsed a wave of black hair, curly like her father's, but not so wild. After a few steps, she turned to glare over her shoulder with the expression a vegan might give a barbecue. Well, are you coming or not? I hadn't taken my second step before she cut in. Shoes off, I hasted to obey. No, the socks stay on. What are you, some kind of barbarian? No, ma'am. I don't know why I said that, but I was scared of her, and I didn't want to give her any reason to send me away. Elisa seemed satisfied with the answer, though, and she permitted me to follow her up the stairs toward her room. I felt like I was on solid ground until she said, "We don't need any more friends. None of our games have room for a third person." Your dad said... He isn't my dad. He killed my father and took me prisoner. Oh, yes, she said, pivoting her socked heel on the wooden floor so smoothly that she seemed to almost float. But that's okay, because sometimes he brings me little boys to eat. I could only hope that my stunned silence was mistaken for composure. Elisa rolled her eyes and opened the door to her room. Just kidding. You're not stupid, are you? I didn't realize I was holding my breath until that moment. I'm sorry, that wasn't a fair question. Most stupid people don't know they're stupid. And I suppose it's perfectly fine if you are, as long as you don't try to perform surgery or vote, or do anything a normal person would do. Elisa rambled. The stairway and hall we passed were heavily decorated with framed portraits, hanging tapestries, and ornate tables littered with precious and intricate things. It was in stark contrast to Elisa's room, which had a simple metal frame bed in the corner and a dark wood cabinet on the other side. The walls were painted black, and the window was concealed beneath a thick curtain. There was nothing on the hardwood floor to disrupt the monastic austerity. How do you play games without any toys? I asked. We play blood games, she said, stressing the plural again. The kind that need magic to work. You do know about magic, don't you? What is going on? Hold on. It just shot back to the top. There we go. The kind that need magic to work. You do know about magic, don't you? Yeah, sure, of course. I didn't want to say anything more to betray my ignorance. I reached for a cookie from the basket, but she slapped my hand away. I stood in disbelief as she ate one of the cookies herself. My mother taught me after she passed away, Elisa said casually, moving to set the cookies on the cabinet. She retrieved something and turned to face me again. If you want to play, then you'll need to give me your hand. What do you mean, after she passed? I tentatively stretched out to her. Now, close your eyes. She could have told me to jump out the window, and I probably would have done it. She had the sweetest smile on her face, and the soft brush of her fingers tracing my palm made me blush. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Don't scream. Mother hates screamers. I opened my eyes a sliver, just in time to see a metallic flash in the air. Elisa's grip tightened around my wrist, while her free hand gouged a needle into the center of my palm. I didn't scream exactly. It was more of a shrieking, yelping sound, like a rabbit trying skydiving for the first time. I tore my hand away with the needle still in it, blood freely running between my fingers. Come back here, Elisa shouted. You're going to make a mess. We both dashed for the door. I hesitated to avoid running into her, but she pushed me aside and didn't slow until she'd slammed it shut and locked it from the inside. You're wasting blood. Give me your hand. No, you'll stab me again. I gingerly pulled the needle out of the skin, prompting a fresh swell of blood. I felt dizzy. Baby, she snorted. That hurt slightly more than the needle. You're already bleeding, so I don't need to stab you. Now, do I? Here, wipe some on me. She offered me the back of her hand. Bewildered, I rubbed a long smear on her pale skin. Her dark eyes sprawled as she watched with eager fascination. I almost took the opportunity to flee, but I couldn't resist asking. How does blood magic work? Mother said that when the world was young, all living things were connected, and the same blood flowed from one to the next. Elisa plucked the needle from my fingers and pricked her clean hand daintily to draw forth a single drop of blood. We started to fight one another, though, and it got worse and worse until we had to pull apart into separate entities. We became so distant that we started taking different shapes, and some animals even preyed upon others until we forgot that we were ever the same. The blood is the only part of us that never forgot. Using the nail of one index finger, she deftly traced a pattern in my blood, a circle with a triangle inside, and a square inside that, and perhaps even a tiny pentagon within. With deep concentration, she pressed the single drop of her blood into the center of the design. Now what are you doing? I asked. She smiled, but the gesture seemed strained and unnatural, like a dog baring its teeth for a dog food commercial. Duh, she said. I'm making magic. And she was. The pattern of blood on her hand was glowing, softly at first, but growing brighter in even pulses. My heart began to race with excitement, and the pulsing light increased to match its rhythm. What's it do? I asked. I'm going to grow you a friend, she said. That's what you want, isn't it? I wanted to tell her that I didn't need a friend anymore, because I had her. But we don't always get what we want, even from ourselves, especially from ourselves. Yeah, sure. That's what I came here for, I said. Okay, watch. The light grew stronger, but I couldn't look away. The pattern was moving now. The triangle was turning within the circle, and the square within that, which moved in the opposite direction, and from the center grew a red stalk, like a time-lapsed bean struggling through her skin, to sprout and curl into the air. Within a breathless moment, the stalk had grown over a foot. The veins of Elisa's hand glowed beneath the skin, like a network of roots. And from that strange plant, an even stranger fruit began to swell. What is his name? Elisa asked. How about Sid? The fruit looked like an organ with a face. I didn't know what a fetus looked like at the time, but when I saw pictures when I was older, I knew that's what it was. How big will he be? I inquired. I want to be taller than he is. Elisa smiled. What? I said. We'll be playing sports and stuff. I want to win. What does Sid like to eat? She asked. I glanced around the empty room, spotting the basket. Cookies, I guess? It was larger now. I could make out tiny hands and feet pressing against the transparent cocoon. And what does he love? Her voice was fainter now, straining with exertion. Her glowing veins extended all the way down her arm now, and for the first time I realized the concentration on her face was mixed with pain. I don't know. I don't think I like this game. I don't want to play anymore. You can't stop now. What does Sid love? Elisa took a sharp intake of breath and grimaced. The plant had stopped growing, and the swiftly gorging fruit was about the size of a watermelon. How was it getting so big? Was it filling up with her blood? Stop it, I said, my voice cracked, but I didn't care. Make it go back. Cut it off. It's not an it, she grunted. His name is Sid, and he is already alive. You have to tell me what he loves, or he will be nothing but, I hate it. I hate him. Make him go away, please. Hurry, you're part of the spell, too. I can't do this alone, she said. It wasn't a watermelon anymore. It was the size of a dog and beginning to grow coarse fur. Now it was heavy enough that Elisa had to kneel and rest it on the ground. The hands and feet were becoming more defined and solid by the second. Its eyes fluttered once and then opened to pierce me with pale, sightless orbs. Mr. Williams, I screamed. Mr. Williams, help! It's hurting her! Thunderous footsteps sounded on the stairs, but the wretched thing reacted to the noise and flailed its arms. One wild claw pierced straight through its encompassing sack and clawed the open air an inch from my face. Bright red fingers clutched the tattered opening and ripped it wide in a rush of blood. All at once, Sid was free and on the ground, standing almost as tall as me. Then someone was pounding on the door. It was still locked. What's going on in there? The voice opposite the door cried out. Elisa, are you okay? She lay panting on the ground. The blood was beginning to evaporate into a thick red mist. I choked and fell to the ground to avoid breathing in the heavy, wet air. The tattered sack, the discarded dying stem, both withering before my eyes. Sid was crouched in terror, its matted blue fur showing through the evaporating blood. Open the door! Boy, are you in there? I crawled across the ground to unlock the door, more pounding, louder, and more desperate than ever. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sid flinching at each resounding crash. The instant I fully turned away from it to unlock the door, I heard Elisa scream. I pounded upon the lock, and the enormous pressure on the other side made the door spring like a trap. The man was roaring, but it was too late. Elisa had been savagely disemboweled. Sid loomed over her, digging through the contents of her stomach as though searching for something. When it turned to face Mr. Williams' onslaught, it was shoveling a bloody, gluttonous clump into its mouth. Mr. Williams almost caught it, but it bounded away just in time. The bear man moved to the window to block its retreat, but he missed again. When Sid lunged for the basket on the cabinet instead, by the time Mr. Williams caught up with it, Sid had already fled through the door. It's my fault, I heaved for air. Mr. Williams knelt over his daughter, clutching her viscera-soaked body to his chest. I could have stopped it, I sobbed. I could have told it not to hurt anyone. I'm so sorry. We need to get out of the house, he said. I followed him downstairs, though I knew it wouldn't return. There was nothing left to satisfy it here. The monster had been born with but one desire, and it would stop at nothing to get it. A cookie monster was born that day. Okay, that was a really great story. I was not expecting that ending, but it kind of leaves me with one thing to say. Cookie, 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 cookie. That was a really, really good story. I liked that. Also, funny thing, in the middle of reading that, I had an ad pop up for another creepypasta that simply says, "My wife has a removable face." All right. Yeah, I don't know what, Rourke. My wife has a removable face. Um, I mean, we could read that. Um, Thank you to Tobias Wade for such a good story. Um, Honestly, kind of making me a little afraid to watch Sesame Street ever again. Um, Also have an ad for Des Moines. The S's are silent. Our fun is electric. I have no idea. Let's see. Do I have any links to any other creepypastas in this? Well, let's see what next post gets us. Um, well, I couldn't find that one, but I did find My Memories Vanished Beneath the Black Sand. Estimated reading time is 5 minutes. Unless anybody has suggestions. My Memories Vanished Beneath the Black Sand has a 6.37 rating. Alright, so do I have any go with the one that I found? Alright. My Memories Vanished Beneath the Black Sand, written by R.L. Rogers. I awoke lying face down in cool, black sand. The air smelled strongly of ocean. Yet, when I sat up and wiped the dirt from my face, there was no shoreline in sight. Instead, what I saw was an endless horizon of black desert. Every direction was the same, a flat plain of nothingness. I felt the warm heat of sunlight, yet saw no sun. Oddly enough, I couldn't even tell whether or not it was daytime. The sky was gray, but not filled with clouds, almost as if it had always been this way. I stood up, picked a direction to walk in, and set out to find anything resembling society. This is when fear began to set in. Before this moment, it was like my mind was in a haze, as if waking up in such a bizarre place was somehow a normal occurrence. Now I was scared. Where am I? How did I get here? And most frightening of all, who am I? As I walked, I tried my best to remember anything about myself. Favorite food, color, where I was born. But I couldn't conjure any memory from the depths of my brain. How long had I been walking was impossible to tell. The sky never grew darker or lighter, just an unchanging gray overcast. I guessed maybe 9 or 10 hours, but it was an utter stab in the dark. My stomach began to grumble. Am I starving? Or just a little hungry? Even this question was difficult to solve. Since I had awoken, my body felt numb and cool, despite the heat that radiated from a hidden sun. I have to find food, I thought. Or maybe I spoke it aloud. It was becoming hard to tell if my dialogue was internal, or if I had just been talking to myself the whole time. I can't quite recall one way or the other. After what felt like a day of wandering, I finally stumbled upon a small pond. Red lily pads were clumped together on half of its surface. I dropped to my knees on the edge of the water and drank, spilling more onto myself than what I had managed to sip from my cupped hands. I let my arms dangle as I closed my eyes and took deep breaths. The water, like the sand, was nice and cool. It may or may not have tasted awful. I struggle to remember that as well. I decided I would stay by the pond for a while. Perhaps someone would wander by and aid me. Perhaps I would die. Either way, I didn't have many options to choose from. It wasn't ideal, but to satiate my hunger, I decided to pick at the red lily pads. This I recall very distinctly, for as soon as I swallowed my first mouthful, I vomited. I watched in both shock and horror as the black sand seemed to devour my spew. The sand crawled up over the mess and sucked it down into the mysterious depths before returning to its perfectly flat state. Seeing this made me wonder about something. I turned around to look for my footsteps, but they had vanished. The black sands covered my tracks as if aiding me in an elaborate theft in which no trace would be left behind. At some point, I managed to doze off, one hand touching the water's edge. When I awoke, a creature at least 2 stories tall sat on the other side of the pond, staring at me. Panic flooded my body, and in an instant I was on my feet. But the creature didn't move. I stood there for a long while, frozen in place. I determined that if it was going to harm me, it would have done so by now. The creature had 3 long, slender legs that moved like tentacles, all complete with massive claws that dug into the black sand. Behind it, a large half shell that extended slightly past its face and curved backwards, down and to a point. It had 3 glowing white eyes in the center of its head, a grotesque face I can only describe as an abyss of shadow and darkness. As it stood up, a great number of long, thin antennas floated about, protruding from a bony plate atop its brow. It stared for an eternity, its stance never wavering, its antennas dancing about as it looked down at me. Its uppermost eye slowly changed to a dim, yellowed white and let out a low, bone-rattling sound. It was a sound that was more feeling than noise. Hold on. And it jumped back to the top again. It was a sound that was more feeling than noise, so low it made my eardrums buzz. It turned its massive body and strode off away from the pond. Its antennas seemed to motion me to follow, or perhaps that part I just imagined. Regardless, I followed the creature. It was hard to catch up. It moved slowly. It wasn't hard to catch up. It moved slowly. Almost sloth-like in its motions. I managed to walk at a steady pace alongside it. It seemed like another eternity had passed since the creature and I had been at the pond. I wondered if this would be my life now, aimlessly wandering a black landscape, side by side with a monster. Side by side with a monster, searching for food and water. A primal, animal-like existence. A state where nothing but those 2 objectives mattered. Is there anyone missing me? Anyone looking for me? Questions I know I hadn't the answers to. The wrong questions. A voice in my head spoke firmly. A voice that was not my own. On the horizon, a tree with white and pink petals came into view, its trunk thick and tall, slightly leaning to one side. The mighty creature stopped. One of its antennas seemed to be pointing to it. I made my way for the tree. The creature remained behind in its place. I looked back as it curled its legs underneath itself, making a makeshift seat. Closer to the tree, a hollow became visible in the trunk. It was about eye level and shaped like a hand. Cautiously, I held my own hand up to the void. My hand would fit perfectly. I took a step closer to inset my fingers into the trunk. As I drew closer, the sound of singing became audible. Quiet at first, but as my hand passed the hollow's threshold, it was deafening. My vision then left me. My breathing stuttered, and my knees felt wobbly. Images flashed through my mind. A woman and a man with his arm around her waist, smiling at me. I looked down at myself and saw I was wearing a blue gown. Graduation. The words surfaced from my subconscious. This is a memory. This is one of my memories. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. And these people are my parents. How could I forget their faces? I felt angry with myself. These people who had raised me had vanished from my brain, and I couldn't help but feel the need to blame myself for it happening. My vision returned. I pulled my hand from the tree's hollow. Had I forgotten to breathe? I panted as if I had been held underwater a little too long. I felt dizzy and nauseous, like I was going to vomit again. I turned toward the creature. There were more of them now. Too many to count. It was like an army of them had risen from the depths of the cool black sand. I felt afraid, and this time the feeling wasn't subsiding. They began approaching me. I placed my back to the tree. My breathing got quicker and shallower when a cold, dark hand extended slowly past the left side of my head and planted itself on my face, suddenly pulling it backwards. What happened next, I can't recall, but when I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed. My brain felt as if it was being stabbed repeatedly by a hot iron. Although the pain was insufferable and my movements were restricted by the various tubes and wires attached to me, I managed to sit up. A small metal table on wheels sat beside me. On it, damp, bloody gauze, scissors, medical tape, and a glass of water. I looked down at my arm. It was numb, but I felt a stinging sensation coming from its backside. I slowly turned it over, shaking as I did. A few words had been carved into my skin in clean, precise cuts. The black sands devours all in time. Oof. That was a pretty good one. Again, that was by R.L. Rogers. It was called My Memories Vanished Beneath the Black Sands. And I think that's all I'm gonna do for this spooky story time. I will do 2 more in the next one. Thank you all for watching and joining. Hope you all have a great day.